Secret calls, leaked transcripts, and shocking revelations are shaking Washington, Moscow, and even America's allies. High-level figures are being accused of betrayal, US lawmakers are demanding resignations, and protesters are taken to the streets with explosive claims. Meanwhile, Europe is bracing for the possibility of a wider war. NATO fortifies its borders, and new military Schengen emerges as defense industries shift to wartime mode. And in the middle of all this, the future of peace negotiations hangs by a thread. Who is really shaping the so-called peace plan? What was happening behind closed doors? And how could these revelations change the course of the war in Ukraine? Let's talk about it. Hello, this is Ukraine Today. Maria Farafonova here with the latest updates. Steve Witkoff advised Russian officials on how to negotiate with Trump. Bloomberg has published a transcript of a conversation between US President envoy Steve Witkoff and Putin's advisor Yuri Ushakov regarding preparations for the US peace plan. The transcript shows Witkoff coaching Ushakov on how to provoke a favorable reaction from Trump, even offering specific advice. According to Bloomberg, the call about preparing the peace plan took place on October 14. The transcript sheds light on how the document to end the war in Ukraine was being drafted. It shows Witkoff advising Ushakov on how to elicit a favorable reaction from Trump and recommending arranging a call before Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to the White House. Previously, the outlet published a transcript of the conversation between Yuri Ushakov and Russian negotiator Kirill Dmitriev. According to the report, the transcript makes it clear that at least some provisions of the US peace plan were actually drafted in the Kremlin. So, a massive scandal erupts. Senior officials from both the White House and the Kremlin were allegedly monitored, and the compromising recordings leaked to the press. The key question now: how will this explosive revelation impact potential peace talks between Kyiv and Moscow? All the details in our full report.
Donald Trump's special envoy, Witkoff, is an extremely pro-Russian diplomat. Rumors have long circulated that Steve likes Moscow, where he happily eats chebureki for breakfast. But now Bloomberg has published a transcript of a conversation between Witkoff and Putin's advisor Ushakov, which took place on October 14th. The American directly suggested to the Russian side that they get ahead of Ukraine and talk to Trump before his meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. Donald's friend even advised the Russians on what words to use to win his heart. The heart of the American president.
Witkoff is completely playing on Russia's side, offering strategies and his services, adapting himself to Russia as much as possible. And around Trump, he builds very bizarre phantom semantic castles against Ukraine. Now this has become known.
This leak is one of the biggest scandals in Donald's circle during his second coming to the Oval Office. Political experts are surprised at how the Russians are manipulating the Americans.
In the phone conversation, it is Ushakov who comes across as the professional, easily telling Witkoff that Russia, in order to please Trump and recognize his peacemaking efforts, even refused to hold the Russia-Arab summit. But this is a deception, because it was actually the leaders of the Arab countries who refused to go to Moscow, since they started to focus primarily on Trump and only then on Putin. Ushakov calmly presents the defeat of Russian diplomacy to the inexperienced Witkoff as a gesture of goodwill from the Kremlin. And there are many such episodes in these conversations.
A sensational leak like this should have led to personnel changes in Trump's inner circle. But the American president surprised journalists with his apparent indifference. All methods are fair game, Trump assured, justifying himself.
It's a standard thing. You see, he needs to sell this to Ukraine. He needs to sell Ukraine to Russia. That's exactly what he's doing, the one who makes deals.
Amid the scandal, Trump sent Witkoff to negotiations in Moscow and his new representative Driscoll back to engage with the Ukrainian side. According to Donald, there is now no deadline for Zelensky to sign the framework agreement. But, as analysts claim, the US continues to put pressure on Kyiv. The 47th President of America is not opposed to meeting with Zelensky, but only after he puts his signature on the required document. Meanwhile, the media report that Ukrainian diplomats managed to fend off and reword at least 3 points from the document written and translated by Dmitry Witkoff. And during his first visit to the Ukrainian capital, Daniel Driscoll assured Ukrainian military personnel that they would undoubtedly suffer defeat.
As I have said more than once, from the very beginning, the Russians never planned to implement any plan, even if all 28 Russian points had remained unchanged, because the goal of this plan is not to freeze or stop the Russian-Ukrainian war. The purpose of this plan, which was written by the Russians, is to buy time and to prevent the West from imposing even more sanctions on the so-called Russian Federation right now. In the
White House, they are already worried that the Kremlin might completely abandon the updated peace plan. Now it will be interesting to see how Stephen Witkoff's trip to the White Stone will end. What treats will be offered and what rewards will be given to their supporter from Trump's inner circle.
It appears that Trump was the only one who reacted positively to Witkoff's actions. U.S. Representative Ted Lieu called Steve Witkoff a traitor, writing this on the social network X.
A true traitor. Steve Witkoff should be working for the United States, not for Russia.
Congressman Don Bacon called for Witkoff to be dismissed and described him as a Russian agent.
For those who oppose the Russian invasion and want Ukraine to remain a sovereign and democratic country, it is clear that Witkoff is fully supporting the Russians. He cannot be trusted to conduct these negotiations. Would a paid Russian agent do any less than he has? He should be dismissed.
Republican U.S. Representative Ryan Fitzpatrick described the call as a problem.
This is a serious problem, and one of the many reasons why these senseless sideshows and secret meetings need to end. Let Secretary of State Marco Rubio do his job honestly and objectively.
Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia Michael McFaul called the call a shock and emphasized the representatives of the U.S. government must advance America's interests.
The task of everyone serving in the U.S. government's national security sphere is to advance American national interests, not the interests of other countries, and certainly not those of barbaric imperial warmongers like Putin.
Meanwhile, protesters in Washington were demanding Trump's impeachment. The demonstration erupted against the backdrop of the Jeffrey Epstein files, which mentioned the name of wealthy and influential individuals, as well as federal immigration raids and the recently published peace plan aimed at resolving the war between Ukraine and Russia. Protesters took to the streets with signs reading, "Trump must go now. You either protect America or Trump. You can't do both." And Trump just sold out Ukraine.
I'm here because I oppose everything Donald Trump is doing. I am especially outraged that he is giving Ukraine a deadline to sign what he calls a deal. This is not a deal, it is capitulation to Putin. It is outrageous that he is asking Ukrainians to sign an agreement that neither they nor their European allies had any part in drafting. Donald Trump is simply trying to restore his own greatness. And the fact that the deadline was announced for Thanksgiving, which is why I used a turkey on this sign, is just unbearable. I stand in solidarity with Ukraine and look forward to the day you drive Russia out of your country.
The removal of the regime rally was centered in Washington, though smaller solidarity demonstrations were also held in Charlotte, South Carolina, and Fairmont, West Virginia. This action is a continuation of a large nationwide protest organized by the No Kings movement, which brought people into the streets in dozens of cities across the country. Meanwhile, across Europe, the belief is growing that Russia may attempt to expand its war. NATO countries bordering Russia and Belarus are reinforcing their frontiers, concentrating troops and equipment. To speed up the movement of weapons and military units across member states, a military Schengen zone is being created. At the same time, European defense industries are rapidly restructuring their production, taking cues from Ukraine's wartime model. More on this next.
The threat from the Kremlin is getting closer. The European Union is preparing to confront Putin at the borders with Russia and Belarus. NATO countries are concentrating weapons and manpower. At the same time, members of the European Parliament are seriously working on a military Schengen.
We must show Putin that Europe is no longer associated with impotence and democracy, with weakness.
The Schengen is being prepared in close cooperation with the North Atlantic Alliance. Brussels is taking decisive steps. Among them is a plan to modernize the defense industrial complex. The European Commission has announced the timeline and presented a new package of military mobility measures. This will enable the European army to move quickly across EU territory without facing excessive bureaucracy, especially in the event of a possible threat from Russia.
We will be strong in the defense industry if we are industrially independent, autonomous, and much less fragmented.
Ukraine is acting as an ally. The country will gain access to defense logistics.
We want to expand the military mobility corridors in Ukraine. This would serve as a security guarantee, meaning we could provide faster support if needed.
First of all, it is necessary to modernize the infrastructure, digitize procedures, and increase funding. One of the key challenges for EU countries remains ensuring the rapid transportation of troops to potential combat zones.
We can respond to these threats either symmetrically or asymmetrically. We have the full arsenal of tools at our disposal.
At the moment, the threat to the Baltics remains, and in the event of a sudden escalation, for example, the French army would need to cover about 1,500 kilometers to come to the aid of its allies. Although light units are able to move relatively quickly, heavy equipment requires significantly more time and preparation.
Currently, European bridges and railways are not suited for the rapid movement of tanks, soldiers, and military cargo. If transported from the west to the eastern flank, tanks can get stuck in tunnels, tangled in complex bureaucracy, and bridges may not withstand the passage of these vehicles.
Drawing on the experience of the Russian Federation's war with Ukraine, the European Union has devoted significant attention to modernizing critical infrastructure. Transport routes will be upgraded to dual-use standards so that they can simultaneously serve both civilian and military needs. The military Schengen plays a particularly important role in strengthening the defense of the Eastern Alliance, especially for the Baltic states and Poland.
Everything depends on our stance, whether we can deter the enemy or encourage them to act aggressively.
But not everyone sees the threat from Russia, or they simply try to turn a blind eye to reality by maintaining close ties with the Kremlin dictator Putin.
We're talking about an armament program that will require us to spend every last penny, and this concerns all of Europe. From the statements of several influential leaders, it is quite clear they want to enter the war.
Germany is doing everything it can to help Ukraine, making every effort to equip the Ukrainian armed forces with long-range missile systems, as well as to organize joint production on our territory.
For several months now, we have been working intensively with the Ukrainian government to implement long-range weapons projects. The Ukrainian army is being equipped with such systems. We have agreed not to discuss the details publicly, as we believe that the Russian side should not be informed about the extent of our military support. I can only say that we are doing everything possible to equip the Ukrainian army with weapon systems of the required range. And the number of such systems will increase in the coming weeks and months, if necessary, up to and including the production of such weapons in Ukraine itself.
The European Union's military budget is planned to be increased to more than 17 billion euros. In total, at least 100 billion euros are needed to modernize bridges and tunnels and to fully launch 4 corridors for military needs in the European Union. Putin's words cannot be trusted based on Ukraine's experience.
There's no need to make things up and, based on these inventions, form an opinion about Russia. There's no need to create an image of Russia as the enemy. You've made up this idea that Russia wants to attack NATO. Are you completely out of your mind or what? You're as dumb as this table, honestly. Who came up with this? It's nonsense. Do you understand? It's utter nonsense.
While the dictator is feeding journalists lies, members of the European Parliament are calling for regular joint exercises and loading tests. They want the European Union to follow NATO's example so that rapid reaction forces can respond swiftly to Kremlin aggression.
What do you think about the latest events? Share your opinion in the comments, like the video, and stay informed about the main headlines. More to come?